Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just here stumbling around with my books. I brought some documents to the studio today because I think I'm going to need it to be some people down today here at the studio. We come here and we have these discussions before we go on the air. And people around here are so well read, the light technicians, the sound folks, John, who's over the entire operation. And if I don't come here prepared, then they'll be beating me down in here, so I have to bring my documents to the studio.
How many books would you say you have, or did you keep?
I got at least 5,000. It's probably more than that.
No, you don't give up books once you get them either.
Oh no, I don't give my books up. In fact, when they borrow my books, I wait until I can hardly breathe until they get them back to me, because I start building other people's libraries. So I started, when they check a book out now from me, I started writing the books down because they borrowed the books and wouldn't return them.
Yeah, because you had more bookshelves was put up a few months ago, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, and when they went out of business over here with Borders, when Borders went out of business, we've had two bookstores went out of business here, Young and Welsh. Remember when they were here, and then Borders went out of business, and I went over there and bought some of the bookshelves from them. And now I'm down in my basement building some of the walls building some bookcases around the walls in the basement.
You don't have a basement that floods, do you?
Used to, but we haven't had any problem since the city started to, once we privatized it. Joe, you know how we have government doing anything, how it always turns out badly.
Well, yeah, the perfect example was the water crisis here. Oh yeah, the government should take over more roles. They screw up on what's already in their hands.
Yeah.
And that's one thing you can understand why they have control, because you wouldn't want people trying to put pipelines in who are private suppliers. That'd be an obvious headache. But then they screw it up, and then they want us still to trust them with more activities. I just don't understand.
They can't do the things that they've been entrusted to do by the letter of the law. They're supposed to do specific things. Make the law, enforce the law, be the arbitrator between disputing parties, and those three roles are pretty much what they do. And they got all this other stuff they don't do well. They don't even do the three roles they're supposed to be doing well. We had taking on all this other baggage.
When this first started, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, in earnest, about the water crisis, we had a guy who was more known to be on the left. He goes, okay, he posted on Facebook, he said, what do you libertarians think about this water crisis? Would this have been avoided with if this was in private hands? And the bulk of the people made good cases. I didn't see a response from him to refute any of that. Because let's face it, if there would be more accountability on an individual level. Then if look at Martha Stewart with all her billions of dollars, and she lost pittance, and she got screwed over because of that. Because she tried to prevent herself from losing a little bit of money. She went to prison over it. Mm-hmm. And people are saying because she betrayed the trust of her investors and all these people that put stock in her word. So she went to prison for it briefly, and it was a country called prison. You don't see politicians going to prison over stuff they do, horrific stuff.
Mm-hmm. Horrific stuff.
And so guess what? Yes, it would be better in the hands of individuals.
Yeah, and we've noticed a very big difference in the efficiency. We haven't had a flood. We were having floods on a regular basis in the basements out there where I am. But when they privatized it and put the sewage management under private hands, we haven't had any problems. And that's why I'm building these bookcases down in the basement now. I would never have done that back in the day, because you go down there, you could actually swim in that basement when they were not cleaning out the sewage and all of that.
Well, you could just say, you could use it for a selling point, say indoor pool.
You go downstairs, you start trying to
put a diving pool on one end, a diving board in one end.
It was pretty bad down there, and I'm the last person to say anything good about government, because I just don't think that we're gonna get it done depending on these politicians. And on the way to the studio, by the way, I was listening to the Rush Limbaugh show. And Rush Limbaugh was talking about how the Republican Party, they have about 40 people now that are against the repeal and replacing of Obamacare, and how they're fudging on Planned Parenthood and all these things that you thought that the Republican Party stood for. And now that we got a person there that would validate everything they were claiming they stood for, and anything they put on his desk in that genre, he would in fact endorse it. And now that he's in there, they don't want to say anything to his desk because they don't want a rubber stamp. As long as they had Obama in there, they could claim that Obama was stopping them from repealing and replacing Obamacare. And they, of course, were against funding Planned Parenthood because of the abortion aspect. Well, Donald Trump's in there right now with these other things, showing you that it's all a scam. All these politicians do is talk out of both sides of their mouths. No principles, no efficiency. And in fact, all the mistakes government makes, they can charge those mistakes off to someone else. You know, it's what Amity Shlaes says in a book called The Forgotten Man. You know, we have she gave this analogy of A, B, and C, and A and B would be the politicians talking over a problem they want to resolve, and then C would be the person that they bring in. He hasn't had anything to do with the discussion. The discussion is about a politician. They bring C in there after the discussion is over, and they then give him the bill.
You know what?
For what they decide to do.
I just don't see why the conservatives care so much about trying to defund Planned Parenthood. Well, they should defund it. I can see that. But I think to show our consideration for their belief system, I think we should start a private fund so we can spay and neuter every liberal we know. I mean, so guess what? I mean, I believe in never interrupting an enemy when they're making a mistake. If they don't want to have their children in the future, God, that's a relief, because the conservatives will have children and they won't have to put up those nut jobs in the future. I think when they implode on themselves, I think that's great.
I came to the studio today to talk about the government's role in all of these different things, and I intend to add a few things to some aspects of it that I don't think we're looking at. And I'm going to play off of an article I wrote, a 3-part narrative that I wrote for Facebook. And I was writing it to talk about a federal judge that had a ruling down in Gardendale and Birmingham, where this judge ruled that the Gardendale school system, which admittedly was using race as a way of making its determination, but what the federal judge did, even though race was in fact considered in the decision of the Gardendale School Board, the judge allowed the decision to go forward, and the decision was that Gardendale wanted to withdraw its agreement made back in 1971 that they are going to be, these silly politicians want to use these children to do something the government has no role in, and that is to push children into alliances with each other in schools so that they're going to mandate integration. And this judge came in and validated Gardendale's right to withdraw from that agreement that goes back to 1971 in terms of Gardendale's students going to be bused to school in Birmingham so they can have racial mixture in the school system. And I came to the studio to talk about that because I just think we don't understand the Constitution, and I don't think many of the judges that are ruling in these cases understand it either. When you go back and look at the 2 cases everybody talks about, Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896, and I contend the court got it wrong then in terms of separate but equal. And then in 1954, in the Brown versus Board of Education case, which was a consolidation of 5 different cases put together in a consortium, and the court ruled upon that May the 17th, 1954. I contend the court got it wrong there too. And I want to explain what I mean by that, because I don't think we understand the Constitution. And I wish I had brought I wanted to bring the document, but I can pretty much, I knew it pretty much. I don't need to read it. But it relates back to the 14th Amendment, which has 2 different requirements in it, 2 major requirements in it. One is that no state can abridge the privileges. It says the privileges and the immunities, and then further down it says, nor shall any state interfere would be involved in equal protection of the law. So the state is mandated not to interfere with privileges and immunities of citizens, nor to deny any citizen the equal protection of the law. So what the court did in 1896, and I contend the court made the wrong ruling in that case, in Plessy versus Ferguson, and I contend that the court made the mistake in 1954, which was akin to the mistake they made in 1896. Now, nobody said this and they're not saying it because I don't think they understand the Constitution. It's amazing these scholars can overlook what I'm going to hope to be pointing out here. And what I'm going to be pointing out here is that rather than the court going to the second part of the 14th Amendment where it says that no state can be in violation of the equal protection of the law, so the court goes in and says that that the state can require facilities to be separate as long as the facilities are equal. And I'm gonna contest that as being a misreading of the 14th Amendment, and I'm also gonna for the first time in history, I'm going to argue a point that has not been argued before by anybody, any of these scholars, because they don't understand the Constitution. They think that they do. They're going to talk about the equal protection of the law. That's not the only part of the prohibition in the 14th Amendment. It also says the abridgment of privileges and immunities. So therefore, the problem is not just the fact that the government got involved to mandate separate but equal, but the government gets in to validate and to make a claim that it has a right to order the separation. The other side of it is what they did in Brown 58 years later. That was wrong too, where the government gets involved in doing something akin to the mistake it made earlier. You see, the court in 1896 validates that the government had the right to order separation. And then they get in 58 years later in Brown, they get involved in complimenting the mistake by saying that the court then, to remedy the separation, the court then orders integration. Both of those are wrong. What the court should have done in 1896, when Homer Plessy, the court case there was that Homer Plessy was riding in the, he was what you would call an octoroon, probably had about 1/8, black blood. That means that your parents, if you have one parent black and one parent white, that's what you call a mulatto. And I won't go into the reason why they would call that mulatto, but there's a reason for that. But that's outside of what I want to discuss here. Then, if you have it like it was with Alexander the Greatest, the one called General Alexander Dumas, who married, who was offspring of de la Pierre and Marie Dumas in Haiti, and the Duke, the Duke de la Pierre married, had an offspring with a Haitian. The French had an offspring with the Haitian, and they produced, because de la Pierre did not want to have the offspring in his French name, which means they weren't married then. Marie Dumas was not married to him. So he took on his mother's name and created that famous line of the Dumas. You remember the Dumas, the writers of the Three Musketeers and the Count of Monte Cristo, and those works. And the black and white created the mulatto, General Alexander Dumas, and then General Dumas married a French woman, and they created a quadroon, and that would be Alexander Dumas Paris, and then he married a French woman, and that would create a octoroon, which would be 1/8, and that person was Alexander Dumas Fields. I'm just making a point here that the amount of black ancestry is reduced with every entry into, in this case, the French. Not that Homer Plessy was French, but I'm just saying that that was kind of like the same thing. So Homer Plessy was what you would call an octoroon, very light skinned, but he had enough of the genotype they could see that he was not, completely white. He was a very light skinned person, and maybe an Adam Clayton Powell type person, let's say, or maybe LaGuardia. The one after the LaGuardia Airport is named after in New York. The Italian. There's a story about a person trying to explain race in America to a foreigner, and they were saying, we don't understand how you define who's black and who's white in the country. And so there was Adam Clayton Powell sitting on the stage, and LaGuardia was sitting on the stage. And so the person said to this foreign person inquiring about, well, who's up there? Which one up there is black and which one is white? They said, well, you see the one up there, Adam Clayton Powell? They said, Adam Clayton Powell, that's the one over there to the right. He looks like he's white, but he's black. And then they said, now LaGuardia, he looks like he's black, but he's white. And the foreign person they were explaining this to was saying, I'm more confused now than I was before you started explaining it. So you get really mixed up in some of the racial politics, right, in terms of people trying to find out who is this and who is that. And it goes back a long way, back in the time even of Aristotle, when they were trying to determine that. And they had this thing called atavism back in the time of the Greeks, because it would be white, and then boom, there's a black child. And it happened also in the northern part of Europe too, with the Moorish influence. But anyway, Homer, in 1896, they had a law in Louisiana. And the law was that you had these streetcars, these conveyances, where public transportation, where there was a seating pattern where whites sat in the front and blacks sat in the back. And politicians do this, by the way, because they always try to divide people so they can keep them fighting each other, so then the politician can walk away with the store. That's what that is about. So when you start seeing segregation, and people up there like Wallace saying later on, he had the outsick Patterson, because Patterson beat him in 1956. So when they ran again in Patterson beat him in 1956. We ran again in 58. Wallace realized that Patterson had outsegged him, meaning he had hollered segregation more than Wallace did. So Wallace said that he would never be outsegged again, meaning that he's going to do more segregation talk than what Patterson did. And so Wallace got up there 2 years later and hollered, segregation now, segregation tomorrow. That's our southern accent. Segregation forever. And then Wallace won. And so that's how they play these politics. They don't believe any of that stuff. These are politicians. The same ones that Rush was talking about today, in terms of, we're against Obamacare until we get a person there that would in fact endorse their passing legislation against it. And then of course they can't come together to pass anything now because we can't agree on anything. But they were doing so when Obama was president, and Obama was in fact nullifying it. And that's what they wanted to happen. Now they got Trump in there, they would in fact sign it. They won't pass anything. Because that's what politicians are about. If anybody believes that politicians have any principles whatsoever, then you've been sleeping under a rock. These are some of the most unprincipled people on the planet. And the same thing is true of all politicians. There's no difference between the ones here and the ones over in North Korea. I mean, the difference is the facade is different. They're just as autocratic and just as crazy as Kim Jong-un. And I'll say this too. Kim Jong-un is no crazier than they are. What it is in Kim Jong-un's case is that he's got to create international havoc. Because if he doesn't, then he's finished. Because he has no mandate at the bottom, and the ones at the top is his military, and he's got to create danger on the outside so that anyone that goes against him, the people see them coming against the country because the country's endangered by what Kim Jong-un is doing. And I can tell you right now, the problem in North Korea is not going to be solved except through military engagement. It's impossible. You have to understand the politics of the politicians. And that problem cannot be resolved because it's in Kim Jong-un to take it to the battlefield. And you have to understand the nature of politics in terms of the democratic aspect of it and the dictatorial aspects of it. And if you don't understand that, you understand what's going on right now. This will not be resolved. And when it happens and jumps off, then you understand why. It's not going to be resolved peacefully. It's impossible. Because of the interest that you have in that political situation there with those politicians in North Korea who are autocratic without any mandate by the people. Over here, there is the facade. The mandate is through the facade that they're representing you. So you go to the poll and you vote them in, and therefore there at least is the validation of their being in office. Although they're not doing it, they're not representing anybody either. And I don't think Rush will take it to this extent, but I'm just telling you the truth about how it plays out when you carry it down to, reduce it down to the common denominator, is that there's no representation in government by any people on the planet. Because government doesn't represent the people. Government represents the government and those in it. And if anybody knows better than I know in that on that particular position, then please let me know and enlighten me. Because that's the way it works throughout history. And I had to go back and look at that. And when I began to look at it, I began to see something that is not being taught, because I don't think people understand it in terms of I think we all got a blind spot here. And it takes some questioning of the things that have been brought to heel. And we think these things have been resolved because we think that everything being taught now has been validated. The claims have been validated. A lot of the claims have not been validated because we have taken Johnny's word for it, and Johnny took Judy's word for it, and Judy took Sam's word for it, and then we're back to Jack and Jill again. And that's, you pass it down and it's accepted as being true, and we don't open the claims back up to see if it's true. So I'm coming here to question some things here in this discussion today. And I am contending that the Supreme Court got it wrong in 1896 and got it wrong in 1954. Homer Plessy was riding in the front of the conveyance, the public conveyance. And they were able to discern that he was carrying part of the genotype for blacks. And they made him move and really put him off. They put him off the conveyance. He then files a suit in court claiming that he should have had equal protection of the law, and by taking him off the conveyance was a denial of that. And the court then came in and did not do what it should have done, which was to order the government out of the segregation business. That's what the court should have done, is order the court to stop ordering segregation. That was a mistake. And then these 9 blind judges in 54 come in, and then the remedy to Plessy versus Ferguson was for these 9 judges to then reverse the mistake and then put another mistake in its place. Let me tell you let me tell you what would be the equivalent of what we're talking about right now. Do you see them talking about replacing, repealing, and then replacing Obamacare? It's the same thing. The government gets involved in something it should be involved in, right? It should have been involved in health care in the first place. That's not a government prerogative for them to be involved in taking over the health care. Now they're talking about repealing it. Okay, that's fine. You should repeal it. But now they're talking about they want the government that is going to repeal what they should never got involved in the first place. And now the government wants to replace it with more government nonsense.
You know, what I'd like to know is...
Give me a break.
Okay, people think, oh yeah, the government should take care of it because they got the funds. It's not fair that people have to... It's like, but they don't seem to realize that government's going to put conditions as a situation develops. You're going to say, oh, we don't like this because you do this kind of physical activity or don't do physical activity. We're going to stop your coverage. And then later on, well, you don't like your political thoughts, so you're not going to get coverage.
Right.
It's not that far off, because if you look at the political climate in this country right now, that is just a hop, skip, and a jump. I'd say a hop and a skip to that. They're going to say, we don't believe in your values and belief systems. You're going to be denied health care coverage.
That's why the government is prohibited from getting involved in these things. If the government gets involved in relationships, it can do the very thing you're saying, John. It can begin to order these relationships based upon the whims of government. I mean, if you say, for example, the government has the right to determine associations, then before you know it, the government's telling people that in their own private business, they can order people to bake a cake.
That's so bizarre. If you said that 20 years ago, that people were going to be forced to bake cakes for people they didn't want to, oh, that will never happen. We're the freest country in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, but it's the reality.
Yeah.
Okay? There's no First Amendment guarantees anymore. You don't have a right to freedom of
association. It is incredible how we're accepting this without anyone challenging these things that the government is in fact doing. What they're doing is that they are in fact taking liberty away from us, trying to act as if they're behaving in ways that are constitutionally allowed for them to take liberty away.
The reason why people don't speak out, because they're so afraid of what they're going to lose. If what the government gives them now, they're going to lose it. That's the reason why healthcare should not be in the hands of government.
Should never been in the hands of government in the first place, and here they act like they're doing us a favor by taking a government program that does not work, and they're going to put another program in there that works, and government is still over the program, and they're going to do what Obama said he was going to do, but Obama didn't do it. So then the problem is that Obama didn't do it right, so that the Republicans going to do it right. This is ridiculous.
It's always designed. Obamacare was designed so it can go to basically it was going to be a failure. It was designed to be a failure, so they can have to push for that single payer option, and that's what it's all about. And even insiders admitted that, and they're smirking because they got it passed, and now it's going to be in. And the UN stepping in and say they're not going to allow us to repeal it. Last I knew, we are the UN. We pay for everything that crap hole organization does. So.
John, it's amazing that Jonathan Gruber, who was the architect of Obamacare, we have him on tape, and everybody's probably seen it by now, and he's up there talking about how stupid the American people are, and they were dependent upon that stupidity. And you know that from the standpoint that somebody's telling you that you have health care costs under Obamacare, and that you're going to put a layer of bureaucracy on top of the cost of the health care, and you're going to reduce the cost by $2,500 per household. Somebody tell me how that was supposed to work. That you have the health care costs, and let's say the cost is at this level for just health care. Then there's an additional cost in terms of the bureaucracy, the paperwork, where you have to now fill out forms because government requires you to, in fact, validate the care has been given. So it's no longer between you and the patient or the doctor and the patient, is now between the patient, the doctor, and the government, and that layer of government costs, or bureaucratic costs, is going to lower the cost. Somebody tell me how that's supposed to work. The government telling, Obama telling people that the cost is going to be reduced of the care by $2,500 per household. How would that work if you're going to have the government adding to the cost? How will the cost go down? And that's what they were telling the American people, and people believe that. The government getting involved in it. Nobody was asking, what is the government getting involved in a takeover of 1/8 of the economy in the first place? Bringing socialism into the marketplace, where the market doesn't determine the cost, but the government determines the cost.
See, I don't think that they ever took it to the American people. I mean, they never did. And they never
didn't ask them.
And it's like they didn't ask it. And another thing is, too, the Americans are, that one guy, Gruber, as you're saying, we are dumb. The American people are on the average are dumb because they don't want to ask questions because they're like children. They got their video games.
I agree.
They got the other stuff to occupy their time. And then they don't want to ask questions about the grown-up stuff. And I found that out myself. I bought health insurance a few years ago. And I thought I got a decent coverage. It cost me like $5,000 or $6,000 right up front. And I had to find the money for that. And it turns out it didn't have any. It had crappy coverage. I mean, I had to go to visit the hospital for overnight stay, and it was like I'm still paying on it because it didn't cover anything. See, that's the thing that we got to address is pre-existing conditions and catastrophic health care. The average person goes to a doctor 2 or 3 times, a few times a year just to get checkups. That can be paid out of a pocket cheaper. There's some doctors, I guess, in Texas who refuse to take insurance. They actually work with the person's ability to pay, and they do work around that. That should be left up to the doctors.
Sure.
They know the costs that they're laying out for their overhead. They should say, we could take this many patients and pay this much. You got some money coming here. No. See, another thing is, too, they're vilifying people who went beyond. What have a politician ever done? Become a politician. He looked good in a suit. He or she looks good in a suit. He got popularity. They belong to the right country club, and they got people to back them.
Yeah.
They make the right speeches. What kind of qualifications do they have to make decisions about this? They're not all doctors. They're not even good. I mean, and if they're lawyers, they're concerned about what they can get away with, not what's right.
Yeah, the more everybody is trying to find a way to get their hands on the $3.29 trillion of income the government takes in every year. And so the more government you have, the more money you can then dish out to different interest groups that are created in a horizontal plane among the government leaders and government entities, where they're creating more and more bureaucracy so that more and more money can be funneled out to special interests. Follow the money. But in terms of follow the efficiency, once government gets its hands on it, one of the things you can take to the bank, and that is, if you have any money left, and that is there's going to be less efficiency because government is inefficient.
Let's face it, they got to shift this paperwork from over here, then they got to send it over to this place because we don't want to, unemploy anybody. Because let's face it, they're not going to cut out a layer of paper handling. They're going to keep all that intact, which adds more cost. And because basically, would you expect somebody to sit in an office or do medical billing or do it at home and not get paid for their time? No, everybody's going to get paid for their time. So it just adds another couple of layers, and let's face it, more hands handling something, the more chance for something to be followed up.
Yeah, bureaucracy is a costly enterprise. And the more simple the delivery system is, the less the cost is, because if it's small, then the efficiency is better. You take the efficiency away from the local, which is in the local in terms of the exchanges. We're in Flint, so it's the doctor here and the patient down the street or in the community somewhere, and they drive to the doctor's office. That relationship between the patient and the doctor, that cost is very, very simple. It's the patient and the doctor, the care, and that's the cost of it. The doctor delivering a service, the patient receiving a service, and in that exchange, the market determining that simple arrangement can be negotiated because in the market, because that doctor can charge his price and another doctor charge a different price. And the market is keeping the price down because there is choice in it.
Because
Government takes away choice, and therefore it adds not only through the bureaucracy, but it adds to it by taking choice away.
See, years ago, I started addressing this way before the healthcare debate ever started coming out, in a large scale like it is now. And because my parents had insurance was different from the people who worked in the factories. And we used to pay more out of pocket because of that when we went to the pharmacy. And we had a pharmacy right up in the corner from the studio here that was privately owned, it wasn't part of a corporation or a chain. And I talked to I knew the guy personally, the pharmacist, and I told him what my parents had told me about, you charge people out of pocket who pay out of pocket more to keep your business afloat. He says, is that true? And he goes, yeah, it is. I have to, because insurance is taking, that's another issue. Insurance is taking so long to pay back. That's an additional cost, because time is money.
Yeah.
Basically, anybody who's provider of any kind of thing, any kind of service, has to go borrow money to make payroll, to pay tax, for the feds to get their share. So they have to borrow that. So it has to extend their line of credit or get another line of credit. So that's another burden on them. So they don't understand that. And and this is back in 77, 78, 79. So, I can't remember the exact year. And I had this we were standing there. He was behind the counter. I was, in the store, standing on the floor of the store. And we were talking about this. And it was in depth. And I got an understanding. I talked to doctors about this stuff. And it's basically they got to wait so long for the insurance pay. They got to have money coming in to pay their bills immediately. Because guess what? Now when they're going to get extended loan, extend their line of credit, there comes a credit card price, or nearly credit card, card price. So people don't understand that. You're paying your overhead, and then you got to pay an additional amount so you can pay your overhead. Where do you make a profit?
Yeah, how do people take the government at its word that in these layers of costs, adding to the layers already in place, and you're adding additional layers, that somehow in the additional layers, there's a cost reduction to be found as more costs are being added to the burden already in place? How do you do that? And how do people accept Obama saying that they're going to reduce costs by $2,500 per household?
How do you expect somebody who's never been in business, never done anything except for running?
He never done anything in business in the first place. Never ran anything.
He ran a nonprofit into non-existence, from my understanding. Yes, what has he done that actually knows how to deal with money? He shows that he knows how to deal with money.
And for him to say that shows how dishonest he is, because no honest person would make a claim in public beyond their understanding of how cost operates in the market. And having no experience, the dishonesty is that you're trying to act like being elected makes you an expert on anything. It makes you an expert on how to become elected by getting more people to vote for you than vote for someone else, and that's where your expertise is. But to say that extrapolates itself and interfaces with other expertise necessary in the job, that's why you have a cabinet around you. And you get a person that understands housing, and a person that understands the treasury, and all of those persons. Your expertise is in terms of running for political office. You're a politician. And if you don't have a cabinet that can assist you in the rest of the things, then you have what we had during the Obama administration. Obama wouldn't even use his cabinet. And you can see where that led to. A total disaster. 8 years of administration that did not work efficiently on any level. And we'll have to dig ourselves out of an additional $10 trillion of debt. The debt was $10.6 trillion when Obama took over in 2009. And 8 years later, we're looking at a national debt now approaching $20 trillion. And that doesn't even include the debt we have yet to get married to in the future. We're going to have more debt than that based upon Obama's administration. Because a lot of the debt has been postponed based upon decisions that have been made. Those debts are postponed into the future, and they will be paid at some point in the future. The future will get here at some point. And so we're talking about an additional $10 trillion of debt approximately was added to the debt under Obama. But we have not even gotten to all of that. And then there's another, I'm going to give you an estimated, conservative estimated amount of debt in the future. And this is very conservative. There are some of the person looking at this indebtedness saying that there's another $100 trillion of debt to be paid in the future as we're going toward the tomorrows to come, and they're saying there's another $100 trillion of debt we're going to meet down the road. I don't think it's more than that. I think it's double that. I think the debt is another $205 trillion of debt down the road that we're going to incur based upon decisions already on the books. That includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. They talk about repealing and replacing, and I don't even know if they talk about repealing it now, given the fact there are 40 Republicans that have come out, according to Rush Limbaugh, that are saying that they're now off that wagon, and they're not even saying that anymore. But if they were talking about repealing it, the mere fact the government is talking about replacing it, isn't that going to be the government still incurring costs? If the government is going to repeal it, and then the government is going to then replace it, how is that how is that any difference in terms of anything other than taking a Democratic plan and put it under the Republican Party's umbrella? How is that different that you change the party that has ownership of the government's plan? See, that's what I'm saying about separate but equal, and then striking separate but equal down. What about getting the government out of mandating either one of the two things? Government shouldn't be mandating segregation. And if that's true, then the government shouldn't be involved in integration either. That's not a decision by the government. And all these persons right here that are talking about how we should celebrate Brown versus Board of Education. I don't celebrate Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education was a disaster. What the government should have done in '54 was order the government to stop ordering children to be in certain buildings. And I'll be honest with you, when I read this book right here, I didn't read the Brown case until 50 years after the Brown decision had been made. It was 2004, where Brown was in 1954. So 50 years later, this book came out. It's called Brown versus Board: The Landmark Oral Argument Before the Supreme Court. And in this book by Leon Friedman, the transcript of the Brown case is in this book. I had not read the transcript. I guess I was owed to my own laces. Well, not just laces either. I was taking their word for it that Brown, we'd already decided Brown, so all the issues in Brown, they were already determined. This has been decided. This is put to bed. No, nothing to see here, and that is the law of the land, and the court did a good job in making this decision about the issue until I read the Supreme Court, the transcript. Where the court was supposed to be making this independent judgment, and the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, and other judges were going to go before the court and argue that segregation was wrong. And they're in the court, by the way, making sociological arguments. They're making sociological arguments in a court that's supposed to be listening to legal arguments. They have to tell me how this hurts the children's feelings. And the court's making a ruling based upon that nonsense. But there's something else going on in there as well, and that's why I brought this book here. Let me tell you the books I brought to the studio, first of all, so you can understand my documentation. Because I don't come here to make emotional judgments, based on I feel good. That's a song by James Brown. Here's another Brown right here. This is Linda Brown. This is not James Brown's daughter. This is Linda Brown in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. The suit is under her name, but there's really 5 suits, and they're in different states. But the court decided to lump them together under one banner. So I brought this book here by Leon Friedman, Brown versus Board: The Landmark Oral Argument Before the Supreme Court. Now I have to admit, I didn't read the transcript until 2004. But when I read the transcript, I'll be honest with you, when I'm reading I'm going through the transcript, reading it for the first time, I put this book down at least 10 times before completing it. And the reason was because what I was reading in the transcript wasn't what was being reported about what happened in this case here. I kept reading Felix Frankfurter's, what Felix Frankfurter was doing. I was reading him jumping into the argument. I mean, he just interrupted. Felix Frankfurter was an associate justice in the Supreme Court. He interrupted the arguments made by Thurgood Marshall and the others on the plaintiff's side more than any other judge did on the Supreme Court. In fact, his interruptions were twice as much as the other judges combined. But there was a purposeness to it. And it makes a lot of sense now to have read the rest of it through other documents, which I'll get to in just a minute, to see how the rest of the documents I brought to the studio
bet you the
interface with that.
See, that was before I was born. But I bet you the press didn't cover all the arguments. That's another thing, is we should have more transparency. We should have people. I mean, people should be more concerned about it. The news should come and take clips of the actual footage of Supreme Court hearings and stuff like that, or court cases being listened to by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Record the whole thing and then put that somewhere. I mean, maybe it is, but I mean, it doesn't seem they're encouraged to go there, or people just don't care because you don't see the coverage. And I certainly you didn't have the coverage then. They just told you the verdict. They didn't tell you the play-by-play.
They didn't tell you about play-by-play. There are two other books. I brought 4 books, but there are 3 of them that's germane to this conversation. This book here is for next week, or another part of it. The court ruling that was made between Gardendale and Birmingham public schools. This judge had ruled that they cannot make these 2 schools congregate. So this judge made this ruling that they can, in fact, have their school system in Gordondale and Birmingham. You have to get your school system together. That's how that works. So, and I agree with that court ruling because I understand the mistake that Brown made, and the mistake made also in Plessy versus Ferguson as well. But anyway, the transcript of Brown versus Board is in this book right here by Leon Friedman, and you need to read this because. As I was reading it, as I was saying a few minutes ago, I was quite frankly shocked by what I saw Felix Frankfurter doing. And what he was really doing, and it's clear in the transcript, but you have to read between the lines, is he was practically taking Thurgood Marshall, who would later on be appointed to the Supreme Court as the first black on the Supreme Court. And they're not going to like me saying this because they think that Thurgood Marshall was the one, and then Clarence Thomas is in there as some guy. He didn't know what he's doing, and he's taking his orders from the late Scalia because Clarence Thomas can't think. But Thurgood Marshall was up here and Thomas is down here. And you look in this transcript and you see that what was going on in that Brown case is that Felix Frankfurter was interrupting Thurgood Marshall because he needed Thurgood Marshall to make the argument so the court could make a decision that was already predetermined by the court.
See, the charge that the court has become activistic in the past 20 years is really mistaken. It seems from what you're telling us that was a long time ago. And I've seen evidence of that myself over the years in Supreme Court rulings, that there was an activist judge, a Supreme Court justice on their side.
You're reading it exactly right. The activist court goes back to the 34-year courtship of John Marshall, who was the Supreme Court justice, the 5th one we had, from 1801 to 1835. The activist court that you're seeing right now has its antecedent in the 34-year reign of John Marshall. And John Marshall was the one in the Worcester versus Georgia case of 1832 when he had ordered the state of Georgia to act a certain way. And Andrew Jackson disagreed with the court. And that's when he told the court, he said, Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. That comes out of a conflict between the executive branch and the court. And we have to go back and look at the whole history has got to be reinterpreted, not rewritten. Has to be explained about what actually occurred, not what's in these history books. And next week, when I get into these two books I'm bringing in by these two great writers, James Ronald Kennedy and Walter Donald Kennedy, twins, marvelous books. One of them called "Why Not Try Freedom," and the two books I mentioned, I'll say that to next week, that I'll be bringing in to read from these two books. But we have the whole country is brainwashed, and that's why what I'm writing right now on Facebook is getting so much controversy, because nobody understands how they've been hoodwinked. The other two books that I'm going to talk about this week, just in the few minutes we have left, this book right here by Richard Kluger, called "Simple Justice: The History of Brown versus Board of Education, the Epical Supreme Court Decision that Outlawed Segregation and a Black America Century-Long Struggle for Equality under Law." The court outlawing segregation, where the court should have outlawed. See, segregation is the behavior of the politicians. What they should have outlawed was the government, Southern governments, which had nothing to do with the Southern governments in the Civil War, by the way. These persons were different politicians doing what they were doing in their time period. That wasn't what the Civil War was about. They were fighting for a whole different thing in the Civil War. And that was fighting for the right for the South to determine its own destiny and not to be a client of the northern states. And I'll bring those documents in next week. And I'm going to read from that book called "The South Was Right" by these two great writers. Okay, that's the second of the two books. And then this other book here is one that was written by one of the persons on the NAACP defense team, and this is Jack Greenberg, the former director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, and the name of his book is "Crusaders in the Courts." And he got on there 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, the 9 attorneys that argued the Brown cases, plural, because there are 5 cases in Brown versus Board. The 9 attorneys that went before the Supreme Court and argued before the Supreme Court. But let me read this to you right here out of the book by Jack Greenberg. Because everybody thinks that the Brown case was Thurgood Marshall being so profound in his arguments that the court was overwhelmed by the arguments he made, and therefore the court then made a determination to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson that serves the law of the land for 58 years and was struck down by the court that was given a better view of the 14th Amendment. And none of that stuff is true. On page 170 of the book by Jack Greenberg, here's what he says about a little wink that was going on in the courtroom. The colloquy was important because in its casual good-naturedness, it, meaning the court, showed a kind of rapport and confidence that might well have been predisposed some justices in Thurgood's favor. In other words, the NAACP had been there, 30-some times before? So some of the lawyers was pretty much of a rapport between the judges and the lawyers for the NAACP. But here's what I want to read, these two lines right here. Thurgood Marshall, later on appointed to the court by Johnson in 1967, Thurgood later told me, meaning that Thurgood Marshall talks to Jack Greenberg, who is a part of the legal defense team, he tells him, he said, later told me that during the argument in the Brown trial, listen to this carefully, he flashed the Masonic secret distress signal to Jackson. Who is Jackson? Robert H. Jackson, one of the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court, who signaled Thurgood Marshall back. That, based on what I had already uncovered in my research, that right there is another nail in the claim that I'm making, to the exclusion of all these other scholars in the country. Scholar is my foot. This was a fix. The Brown ruling was fixed. In fact, when somebody need to go and read, maybe I can read this book here, The Crusaders, because it goes into the appointment of Earl Warren on the Supreme Court. Because what the court did, and this is also very unusual, the court had, the Brown case went before the Supreme Court. You know, the Supreme Court is an appellate court, except in some cases, for example, when it deals with ambassadors. There are some cases where it's not appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can take the case on directly. But mostly the Supreme Court is an appellate court. It's the last court of appeal. So once the Supreme Court rules upon it, then that's it. Of course, when it comes down to the tax court, that's it for the tax court. You can't appeal it either.
Except for the Second Amendment. They keep on going back and forth. I mean, they've done this time and time again. So
yeah, if you can appeal it to the Supreme Court, but you can't appeal it above the Supreme Court. So you can go back to the court and ask for the court to reconsider, but you can't ask for a court above it to overturn what the Supreme Court has said. But yeah, the court can change its mind, does all the time. And that just shows you that it's I mean, they're trying to say the Constitution is a living document. More nonsense.
So I guess
it's just judges on the Supreme Court acting like God, as if the language does not mean what it means, and that the language is transient, so it can mean one thing in one time period and mean another thing in another time period. You know, these people are not serious.
I heard people say that it's a living document because they want to give this impression, or they have the idea that means it's going on. It means it's still important. It's still critical. But what the legalese people mean by that means it's amendable, it's changeable. We can look at it with these pair of glasses one day and see this, and put on these other pair of glasses, see that, and it's how we feel and what these people politically involved are telling us what it means now. That's what it means now.
John, they're so crooked in terms of the whole notion of it being being a living document, is that they want to talk about two different kinds of ways of interpreting the Constitution. One is what they call a strict constructionist, where the language is a language without anyone saying, well, it implies this and so on. So the meaning is not only expressed, but is also implied, and the implication of it is something different than what the express language says. And they want to say then those can be you can have a loose construction of the language, and that's what they're doing in terms of all this stuff about people born outside the country. They're saying, well, if they're born on American soil, but born outside the country, but they may be born like in Guam, then they're allowed to run for president, and they want to try to act like the Nationalization Act of 1790, 95, 98, and they kept on amending it beyond that point as well in terms of naturalization, and they fail to understand, these scholars now fail to understand that naturalization is not natural born. It's called the Naturalization Act. You can't naturalize people to be natural born. I mean, I just can't believe what scholars are saying. Okay, let me read. So here these people are in the court, and there is Thurgood Marshall sending up, according to Greenberg, this is what Marshall says later after they argued before the court. He sent up a distress signal to Jackson on the bench, who flashed him back the secret Masonic distress signal. They are communicating with each other. This is wink going on, where there's an understanding between Thurgood Marshall and the court. This determination of striking down Brown v. Boyd. They're even deciding that the decision must be unanimous, because if it's 5-4 or there's some wiggle room for the South would in fact use its secessionist document, the idea that if the court is divided on the issue, then why should it be mandatory for the South to follow it if the court can't agree upon what the language says? So they have to now decide to have a unanimous opinion on the court, which is why Earl Warren reads the opinion, because he is the one bringing this noise to why they decide the way they decided, with Warren saying that it hurts the minds and souls of children who are put in schools that are assigned there by the state. So now they want to make the states assign them to be in different schools. What the court could have done is what it should have done in the beginning. That is, get the government out of decision making on either side of the question. Courts the government not ordering separation. It's called segregation when the court orders it. But if there's a separateness that goes on because people are in this neighborhood and people in that neighborhood, by where they choose to congregate, then that's their congregation. That they have the right to do that. The government can't tell you. And the other thing of it, the government's telling people who they can marry at one time, and now they're gonna get into it and then redefine marriage. I'm against all that nonsense. The government should have gotten itself out of making the decision on one side in Plessy versus Ferguson, and the government should have gotten out of it in terms of the decision in Brown v. Boyd. The government should have said that you have no right to be involved on either side of the integration and separation question. The government should not be involved in ordering anybody to go into a certain place. And they failed to do their mission 58 years later. Anyway, I'm saying that now, but I'm going to finish this up next week when I get to what's going on right now, because a lot of things are going on right now in terms of these monuments that ties into this conversation. We get to that next week. Okay, got to get out of here. I want you to always follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.